This man recovered from a deadly illness, but he was no longer the person he once was. In 1965, a happy family began a new life by moving into a house in the Amityville area. Hoping for a better start, they never imagined that the decision to move would turn into a nightmare. All family members were found murdered in their sleep, killed by their eldest son, who used a firearm to end their lives. After the tragedy, the eldest son was imprisoned for his crime. However, the darkness didn't end there. Rumors began to spread among the townspeople. Many believed that the house harbored an evil, malevolent force capable of influencing anyone who lived within its walls. Fear spread among neighbors and even those who merely passed by, convinced that something sinister haunted the place. 40 years later, the story shifts to a small family consisting of Joan, a single mother who lives with her 3 children, Belle, Juliet, and Jim. Their family life is far from perfect. Jim, the eldest son and Belle's twin brother, now lies in a coma due to a severe brain injury. He is completely unconscious, and Joan cares for him with endless patience.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Everything's gonna be fine. You know we're only 5.
Jim's condition is tied to Belle's troubled past. Belle is a rebellious teenager, stubborn, reckless, and difficult to control. One day, she got involved with a guy and during their relationship sent him intimate photos of herself. Belle was horrified when she later discovered that her private photos had been leaked and circulated throughout the entire school. The scandal quickly reached Joan and Jim. As a protective brother who couldn't stand seeing his sister humiliated, Jim made a rash decision. He went to confront the man who had spread the photos, intending to teach him a lesson. The man lived in an apartment on the 3rd floor, and there a violent fight broke out between the two. Unfortunately, despite Jim's efforts, the fight ended tragically. Jim fell from the 3rd floor, suffering a critical head injury that left him in a coma. Dr. Milton, who treated Jim, declared that his brain no longer showed signs of proper function. He could only stay alive through medical equipment that maintained his vital organs. Since then, Jim's life has been completely dependent on those machines. Due to his condition, regular hospital visits were necessary, but the growing medical expenses became a huge burden for Joan. As a single mother, raising 3 children, she soon ran out of money. Desperate, Joan decided to care for Jim at home instead. She acquired the necessary medical devices so Jim could continue receiving treatment without constant hospitalization. To reduce expenses and focus more funds on Jim's care, Joan made the difficult decision to sell their old house and move into a new one, an old house being sold at a very low price in Amityville, the same house infamous for its horrific past. The moving process was assisted by Joan's sister Candace, who happened to live nearby.
Oh, you guys made it. I know what these old houses.
And first, okay.
Okay, well, I have everything set up the way. Fine. What did Dr. Milton?
The move also affected Belle's life directly. Now living in a new environment, she was forced to adapt and transfer to a new school located close to their new home. At her new school, Belle met a boy named Terrence, who sat behind her in class. Terrence soon discovered that Belle was living in the infamous Amityville house, the one tied to the terrifying tragedy from decades ago. He seemed to know more about the house than he was letting on.
It's the house.
What house?
Night soon fell. As Belle was working on her assignment in her room, she noticed a section of the wallpaper starting to peel off, but she chose to ignore it. Her attention shifted when she heard a noise coming from downstairs. Carefully, she went down to investigate the source of the sound. As she looked around, Belle was startled by the sudden appearance of Juliet, who couldn't sleep. Moments later, the sound of Jim's medical alarm echoed through the house, signaling that it was time for his scheduled injection, as instructed by the doctor. Joan quickly took the syringe and administered the medicine into Jim's body.
Here, Mommy's here.
Okay, sweetie.
Who's my brave boy?
But right after that, Jim's heartbeat suddenly stopped. Refusing to lose her eldest son, Joan immediately began pressing on his chest, desperately trying to bring his heart back to life. Amid the chaos, Belle calmly said that maybe it was simply Jim's time to go. Her words enraged Joan, who instinctively slapped Belle across the face, furious that her daughter would say something so heartless in such a moment. But then something unexpected happened. The monitor began to show signs of life again. Jim's heartbeat slowly returned and his eyes and mouth opened on their own.
You're never gonna stop.
Joan was overwhelmed with emotion and gratitude. For the first time since falling into a coma, Jim had shown signs of awareness. The next day, Belle returned to school and happened to run into Terrence again. During their break, they ended up having a deeper conversation than before. After learning that Belle now lived in the infamous old Amityville house, Terrence brought up the topic of her new home. As someone who had lived in the town all his life, Terrence had grown up hearing chilling stories about that house. He told her that decades ago, a tragic murder took place there. 6 family members were found dead in their bedrooms while asleep, killed by their own eldest son. The case shocked the entire community, becoming not only a major news story, but later the inspiration for a horror film based on true events.
Wait, whoa, where are you going?
After school, still shaken by Terrence's story, Belle confronted her mother, demanding to know why she never mentioned the house's dark history. She was certain Joan must have known about its past before buying it. If she had known earlier, Belle said, she would have refused to move there. Joan apologized and explained that buying the house hadn't been an easy decision. At the time, she had been desperate and overwhelmed. The choice wasn't made to hide the truth, but because it was the only way to keep their family afloat. Joan had been forced to sell their previous home because she could no longer afford their living expenses, especially with Jim's medical bills constantly increasing. The new house, sold at an unbelievably low price, was her only option. With the remaining money from selling their old house, Joan felt she could at least sustain their basic needs. Shortly after their conversation ended, Dr. Milton arrived. He had come at Joan's request so she could share the latest news about Jim's condition. Joan told him that Jim had opened his eyes and mouth, something that had never happened since he fell into the coma. She was thrilled, convinced this was a remarkable sign of progress. Dr. Milton, experienced in handling such cases, explained that despite the small movements, Jim's brain still showed no normal function. No patient had ever recovered from a brain injury as severe as his. But Joan refused to give up hope, insisting that Jim would be the first to recover. Dr. Milton finally agreed to schedule a follow-up examination. He promised to return soon and conduct an MRI scan to monitor Jim's condition more closely.
I suppose we could do another fMRI.
Any recovery?
It's highly unlikely. One with James's injuries ever recover.
That night, as the house grew quiet and everyone retreated to their rooms, Belle couldn't sleep. Restless, her eyes wandered back to the wall where the wallpaper had started to peel. Curiosity got the better of her. She reached out and slowly pulled at the torn section to see what was behind it. Beneath the layer of wallpaper, she found faint reddish stains. Though decades had passed, the traces of blood were still there, not gone, merely hidden beneath the paper all this time. The next day, Belle met Terrence again at school. This time, Terrence came with his girlfriend, Marissa. He introduced Marissa to Belle so they could get to know each other and become friends. During their conversation, Terrence suggested an idea: to watch a horror movie together at Belle's house. But not just any horror movie. It would be one that was directly connected to the history of her home. Terrence proposed they watch it exactly at 3:15 a.m., the time people claimed the gruesome murders in that house had taken place. Watching a horror film in the very house where such a tragedy had occurred sounded like an eerie thrill. Time passed, and when the clock struck 3 a.m., Terrence and Marissa arrived at Belle's house. Belle told them to stay quiet so they wouldn't wake her mother.
1,000 times.
Shut.
I've never been. Okay, so, agreed. All right, the original it is.
They began watching a horror film titled Amityville, based on true events that depicted the same bloody tragedy which had happened in that house. The movie showed several terrifying scenes, one of them involving the discovery of a hidden room in the basement. But exactly when the time reached 3:15, something unexpected happened.
Well, something.
Can't go through here.
The power in the entire house suddenly went out, plunging every room into darkness. They had no choice but to go down to the basement to try and turn the electricity back on.
Just try and find the fuse box. Hey, I think I found it.
However, the three of them were shocked when Joan appeared, thinking they were intruders. Terrence and Marissa, not wanting to make things worse, quickly apologized and decided to leave. After they left, Joan's anger turned toward Belle. She was furious that Belle hadn't told her she was inviting friends over, especially at such a late hour. Joan was also angry because she thought they had dared to approach Jim and remove his blanket. Belle was taken aback, insisting firmly that they had never gone near Jim's room at all. The next morning, Dr. Milton arrived as scheduled to conduct Jim's follow-up examination. Using his scanners and monitoring equipment, he began re-evaluating Jim's physical condition. Based on the initial readings, Dr. Milton found something astonishing, indications that Jim was no longer in a fully comatose state. Although his body remained completely paralyzed, the monitor displayed responses from his nervous system. To test this further, Dr. Milton asked Joan to stand beside Jim's bed to see whether Jim reacted to her presence. Sure enough, as Joan approached, the monitor began to spike. Small surges of activity appeared on the screen. However, the pattern was strange, with the spikes occurring far too rapidly to be natural. At that exact moment, Joan suddenly fainted right beside Jim's bed. Belle and Candace, who were also in the room, panicked and rushed to carry her into another room.
Your brother's back.
Left alone with Jim, Dr. Milton began to feel uneasy. Something about Jim's body seemed off. As he leaned in for a closer inspection, he noticed something horrifying. A small maggot crawling across the bed, coming from underneath Jim's back. When he lifted the sheet, he saw more maggots and even flies gathering on Jim's skin. In an instant, the flies burst upward, swarming into Dr. Milton's face and mouth. He choked and panicked until he suddenly realized none of it was real. It had all been a hallucination. Trembling, Dr. Milton realized something was deeply wrong with that house. Without saying a word, he hurriedly left the room and fled from the home altogether. That night, the family dog, Larry, wouldn't stop barking toward Jim's room.
Come on, Jimmy.
You can blink once for yes.
Okay.
Annoyed, Joan refused to let the dog go near that area. Then, precisely at 3:15 a.m., Juliet suddenly woke up, disturbed by unseen forces in her room. She wasn't the only one. Belle also experienced strange disturbances at the same hour. The next day, Joan and Candace decided to buy a special communication device designed for patients like Jim. The device allowed users to form words on a screen using only eye movements, a groundbreaking tool for those completely paralyzed. Once the machine was installed, they decided to test it by asking Jim simple questions. Shockingly, he responded. Letter by letter, words appeared on the screen, forming coherent sentences through his subtle eye motions. Not long after, Belle came home from school and was called into Jim's room by her mother. Joan asked her to talk to Jim using the new device. Belle hesitated at first, but eventually gathered the courage to ask him whether he missed her. A few seconds later, the device began to respond, the letters slowly forming into the words, "I miss you." Before Belle could say anything, Jim's eyes moved again, typing out a new sentence. That he had forgiven her for what happened in the past. The message referred to the dark event involving Belle's ex-boyfriend, the one who had exposed her private photos and ruined her life. The event that had also changed Jim's life forever. The next day at school, Belle met Terrence and Marissa again. This time, the meeting felt different. There was a deep unease written on Terrence's face. He finally opened up to Belle, admitting that he had sensed something strange from the very beginning. To him, the fact that Jim suddenly showed signs of awareness after being in a coma for 2 years, right after Belle's family moved into the Amityville house, was far too suspicious to be just a coincidence. Terrence suspected that the Jim Belle knew was no longer really there. He was convinced that some unseen entity had taken residence within Jim's body. Terrence even mentioned the hidden room in the basement, which he believed was deliberately sealed because it contained something dark and terrible. Although Belle initially doubted Terrence's words, he urged her to ask Jim directly. That night, after making sure her mother was asleep, Belle quietly sneaked into Jim's room. She asked him if there was truly another presence living inside him, since his behavior had grown increasingly strange. Jim's response made her blood run cold. He wrote that yes, there was another entity possessing him. Trembling, Jim begged Belle to kill him by disconnecting his breathing apparatus. After he pleaded with her again and again, Belle, shaking and terrified, finally gave in and removed Jim's life support tube.
What can I do to stop it?
No, I can't do that. Are you sure you want me to do this?
At that moment, Joan suddenly entered the room and saw what Belle had done. Furious and terrified, she scolded Belle for acting recklessly, warning that she could have made Jim's condition far worse. But when she checked Jim's body, she was stunned to find that he was still breathing on his own. It was a miracle. Jim was breathing without assistance, a clear sign that he was somehow recovering. Overwhelmed with disbelief and joy, Joan ordered Belle out of the room, insisting that from now on she alone would take care of Jim and ensure everything was handled properly. She didn't want anyone interfering, especially after what had just happened. The following day at school, Terrence met Belle again and warned her once more. Whatever was possessing Jim was not something to take lightly. He believed the entity was malevolent, something dangerous that could harm the entire family, including Belle herself. According to Terrence, if they waited too long, whatever had taken over Jim would begin killing her family one by one. He urged Belle to leave the house immediately, even if it meant convincing her whole family to escape. But Terrence knew it wouldn't be easy to persuade Joan, so he suggested Belle stage a deception. Inspired by his idea, Belle came up with a plan. After school, she secretly used Jim's communication device and manually typed a message pretending it came from him. The message expressed Jim's desire to go outside for a bit, to enjoy the fresh air after being confined indoors for so long. Belle knew her mother's heart well. Joan would never refuse a request from Jim. She was certain her mother would take Jim out of the house right away. The plan wasn't without purpose. Belle knew this would be her only chance to explore the basement while Joan and Jim were gone. She wanted to uncover the truth once and for all, to prove that something had been hidden in that house since the day they moved in. When everything went according to plan, Belle wasted no time. She grabbed tools and headed straight to the basement, determined to uncover the sealed area. After much effort, she managed to pry open a gap that led to a hidden room. The moment she broke through, a foul, rotting stench seeped out from the darkness inside. The walls and floors were smeared with dried, reddish stains, old blood that had never been fully cleaned. Meanwhile, Joan and Candace were outside, pushing Jim's wheelchair down the path to let him breathe some fresh air. But as they moved farther from the house, Jim, who had seemed calm moments ago, suddenly began to grimace in pain. At that same moment, a piercing scream rang out. Juliet had just discovered their dog, Larry, dead in a horrifying state. The scream startled everyone, including Belle, who rushed out of the basement in panic. As she emerged from the house, she caught a glimpse of Jim's face, his expression twisted in agony, as if something inside him was being torn apart by the distance. A chilling realization struck Belle. Whatever entity had taken over Jim's body could not survive for long outside that house. That night, Belle tried to have a serious conversation with her mother. She wanted to convince Joan that they needed to leave the house immediately. To prove her point, Belle invited Joan down to the basement to show her the hidden room she had discovered, the one filled with dark stains on the walls and the foul stench that seeped from within. But instead of reacting with shock or fear, Joan remained calm, almost unnervingly so, as if the room was something she already knew about. That was when the truth finally came out. Joan confessed that she had known about the Red Room long before they moved in. In fact, it was the reason she chose that house in the first place. Joan then revealed a secret she had been keeping for years. When Belle's father was dying of cancer, Joan had prayed endlessly, day and night, begging God to heal him. But her prayers were never answered, and her husband eventually passed away. Years later, the same agony returned when Jim fell into a coma after saving Belle from the disaster that ruined both their lives. Once again, Joan prayed for a miracle, for any sign of hope. Yet nothing happened. Jim remained lifeless, trapped in his own body. Her grief and desperation slowly turned into anger and then into disbelief. Joan lost her faith in God. No longer relying on prayer, she began seeking answers elsewhere. That was when she learned of the Amityville house, a place rumored to possess a dark power capable of healing the dying. That was why she moved Jim there. Joan truly believed the house itself held the power to cure him, and to her it seemed to be working. Jim had shown signs of recovery for the first time in years. Joan didn't care whether the source of that power was divine or demonic. All that mattered was that her son was coming back to life. Hearing her mother's confession, Belle was horrified. She pleaded with Joan to leave before it was too late. Belle was terrified that the same evil force that had haunted the house 40 years ago was now consuming Jim, and that soon history would repeat itself. But no matter how hard she begged, Joan refused to leave. Desperate and heartbroken, Belle decided to escape on her own. She packed her clothes and important belongings into a bag, then went to find Juliet, begging her little sister to come along. Belle didn't want Juliet to be trapped in that cursed house when things turned deadly. Before leaving, Belle told Juliet to wait by the door while she grabbed some money from Joan's drawer, something they would need to survive once they got out. But as Belle reached into the drawer, Joan suddenly appeared behind her. Without hesitation, Joan struck Belle, knocking her unconscious. When Belle woke up, she found herself lying on a bed. The clock read 3:15 a.m., the exact time the Amityville murders had taken place decades ago. The air in the house felt thick and heavy, filled with an unnatural energy. She could feel it. The evil presence had fully taken over Jim's body. In the red room, fresh words were scrawled across the wall in blood. Kill them all. At that same moment, Candace arrived at the house, unaware of the danger inside. She had come to check on the family, concerned after not hearing from Joan. From the window, Belle saw her and screamed desperately, trying to warn her not to enter, but Candace couldn't hear. As soon as she stepped inside, Jim appeared from the shadows, holding a gun. Without hesitation, he shot Candace dead. Belle watched in horror as her aunt collapsed to the floor. The gunfire echoed through the house, waking Joan and Juliet from their sleep. Joan tried to leave her room, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside. Even the windows were sealed tight. On the other side of the house, Belle rushed toward Juliet's room, determined to save her little sister before Jim, or whatever was inside him, found them first. Meanwhile, Jim headed toward Joan's room. Realizing the being before her was no longer her son, Joan tried to fight back, holding up a cross in a desperate attempt to drive out the evil spirit inside him, but it was useless. Without hesitation, Jim shot her and killed her. Now, only Belle and Juliet remained. They were trapped inside the house, every door and window sealed with no way out. Their fear intensified when their family dog, Larry, who had previously died mysteriously, suddenly rose again, possessed by the same dark force. Belle quickly told Juliet to hide while she distracted the dog. As Belle struggled to fend off the creature, Jim managed to find Juliet. He dragged her into a bedroom and forced her onto the bed, preparing to kill her. Fortunately, Belle arrived just in time and, without hesitation, shoved Jim out of the upstairs window. Both of them tumbled down and crashed hard onto the ground below. Although not killed immediately, Jim began writhing in unbearable pain, begging Belle to bring him back inside the house. But Belle wasn't fooled. She pulled him farther and farther away. The farther he got from the house, the weaker he became, until the evil entity finally released him.
Holy.
I'm sorry about everything.
No!
You're not great.
No! 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 Please!
Jim returned to his true self, paralyzed, helpless, and dying. Before taking his final breath, he thanked Belle for ending his suffering. In the end, only Belle and Juliet survived the horrific ordeal. Days later, a narration takes us to the police investigation. Officers arrived at the scene, gathered evidence, and began reconstructing the events. At first, Belle was suspected of killing Joan, Candace, and Jim, but there wasn't strong evidence against her. In fact, Jim became the primary suspect. Forensic results showed that his fingerprints were the only ones on the firearm used in the murders. This confused investigators because medically, Jim was a fully paralyzed patient, logically incapable of holding a gun, let alone firing it. Juliet testified and insisted that Jim was the one responsible for the killings, while Belle had only tried to save them. Yet, the investigation continued. Dr. Milton, who had treated Jim for years, confirmed that Jim's condition made it medically impossible for him to walk, hold a weapon, or commit murder. The case grew stranger and more unexplainable, leaving authorities baffled. The house known as the Amityville house had kept its dark secrets for decades, and once again it had claimed new victims, leaving behind unanswered questions. Was the house merely an old structure, or did something far more terrifying truly live within its walls? And so, the story ends.